on the notion of uh, uh, finding our own identity, which was historically rooted in a very rural landscape, uh, defined by almost feudal relationship between landowner and the people who till the land. So the romanticized image of the country that emerged from the independence movement was one of a rural ideal that relied on going back to the roots, on simplifying, not anti-diluvian, not anti-technology, but certainly, when the notion of khadi comes to mind, it's a very different notion. It was a very, very powerful idea, which helped galvanize political support for the independence movement to extraordinary effect. But it has lingered in the imagination of our country and in the public debate to a point, I think, where it has um, lost, it should have lost its relevance, but politically has not. Still remains quite important. Um, this accounts for, and why is it? Why is it that it has been convenient and important for us, or we've felt it important to keep this notion of the rural ideal alive in our national narrative? It is because of the logic of our politics. So if just physically a disproportionately large proportion of the electoral base lives in rural India, then the political narrative and the issues that our politics must address necessarily has to focus on that constituency, right? And that has over time actually been perverted and exploited, even though the ground realities are changing. So, officially, if you look at our statistics, we'll tell you that India is, about 30% or not even 30% urbanized, right? And in 10 years, we might be, whatever, 35, 40%, which would still be low. But in actual, that definition of urbanization is a very technical, narrow one. And it has to do with the legal status and other characteristics, but in particular the legal status of what is an urban space. So an urban local body obviously is part of the urban space, but it is not politically enticing for a part of the country that is not legally an urban local body to actually become an urban local body. And that's because the entire government machinery and the resources that go with it are allocated systematically to rural India. So if you look at the size of the Rural Development Ministry and the central government versus the Urban Development Ministry and the budget that goes with it, that tells the whole story. So if I'm a Gram Panchayat, then the allocation of resources that I get, budgetary resources I get, is much larger than if I declare myself as a ULB. So it becomes a self-perpetuating thing. So in some of you must know that in the latest census, compared to the previous one, so in that decade, between 2001 2011, there's been a very rapid growth of a new category of towns, right, that are not, legally speaking, categorized as urban local bodies, but they feel like they are physically very much urban spaces. And the consequence of that development is that they've presumably received a lot more resources as they've developed, they've benefited in different ways, but they have not been subject to the normal planning of services and layout of physical infrastructure that they would have been subjected to had they been designated as ULBs. So you have actually had a very rapid growth of unplanned urbanization. And that's partly to do with the, fundamentally to do with the political economy of the process, right? Uh, Second point I wanted to make on the political economy very briefly is, again, the representation of rural versus urban India. It's true that a larger proportion of the population lives in rural India, no matter how we define it, versus urban India. But the constituencies, the way they are drawn out, have an inherent bias in them because they are pro-rural. So the delimitation bill, as it is called, which demarcates the, the geographical contours of our voting constituencies, are linked to census. But the latest delimitation that was done to redraw the constituencies still harks back to, at least the 2001 census, if not before, right? And Parliament has chosen not to revisit the geographical design of our constituencies until now, the census of 2030 something. So by then, the actual physical urban population will be much larger, but our voting constituencies will still disproportionately reflect a rural voice. So the point I'm making is that the politics of our situation makes it much harder for us to direct resources and attention that our cities actually need, right? Second point I'm wanting to make is, whatever the politics, whatever the political ideal or politically pragmatic ideal that we've been pursuing, concept of what constitutes a smart India, right, in the role of agriculture versus manufacturing, the reality, the historical reality, anywhere in the world, is that development